What's up, guys? Welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Ordell, and in today's video we're covering potentially the worst chess opening for black against e4. We have technically 20 different options, including the French defense, e5, Perk, Scandinavian, Karl Kahn, Sicilian, the list goes on and on. We're just going to bypass all of those systems and play the move f5, with the Duras Gambit offering white the opportunity to play the best move here, and it's not even close, just e takes f5, simply going up a pawn, and on top of that, threatening queen h5 with check. I covered a previous video on what black can do against this to try to survive and somehow fight for a win. I'll leave a link to that at the end of this video. But guys, in today's video, we're going to be covering what happens if white declines the gambit. Surprisingly, if you look at elite chess, black wins 46% of the time in this position and draws another 3%. Very good, considering the circumstances. And this move e5 is played quite a bit, just trying to expand in the center of the board. We're going to cover that, but let's first cover what happens if white tries to defend the pawn with the move of knight c3. Well, in this case, we're simply going to play f takes e4. And notice what we did here. We gave up a flank pawn for a center pawn, but honestly, I would much rather give up my c pawn for a d pawn in the center of the board, kind of like a Sicilian type idea, because our king is very vulnerable to attack. For example, if we play this move d5, just trying to kick the center around, this may seem like a good move, but all of a sudden we see queen h5 with check. Obviously, king d7 runs into queen takes d5, but the main idea here is that after g6, yes, the knight is attacked and the queen is attacked, but white is now able to centralize that queen on e5 and attack our rook. And really the only way that we can save it is by giving up our knight f6. But in that case, I mean, knight takes f6, and what on earth are we doing? The best option here is actually just taking the knight and going down the exchange, in which case we're going to play knight f6. And yeah, this queen is trapped in a sense because it cannot move without being captured, but now white's just going to play a move like d3 with bishop h6 ideas in the air, and this is just not looking good for the black camp. So y'all, against this move knight takes e4, we do have to be pretty careful. The most popular option here for black is a knight f6, attacking the knight, and on top of that, defending that very key h5 square. And notice here, guys, I mean, if white wants to play a move like d3, we're actually just not going to take that knight, but just keep kicking that knight around, because in that situation, we can play the move d5, and if this knight runs away to a square like c3 or g3, in that case, let's just expand in the center of the board. What happens here if white captures on f6? Well, again, we got to be careful. Usually in chess, you want to take towards the center of the board, but in this case, it results in us losing the game in only 5 moves. So guys, remember, by playing the Duras Gambit, you're giving up that very key h5 to e8 diagonal, so you got to be very careful to have some kind of protection on these 2 key squares. So we got to play this move e takes f6, that way against queen h5, we're able to play g6. And from this point, we're just playing chess, but white does have some interesting ideas, and I'm not going to lie to you, white is simply better here. This move bishop d3 is very interesting, eyeing queen h5 again, eyeing this move g6, in which case white would simply capture back with the bishop. Against this, we do have a couple of different options. One of them is just playing this move g6. Another option, which you guys might find interesting because, I mean, let's face it, we're already playing the Duras Gambit, is knight c6. Whole idea being against queen h5 check, we're not going to play g6, but play king e7 in bomb cloud style type fashion. By the way, kids, don't smoke. It's not good. But here against this move, king e7, let's say white plays a move like knight f3. I actually think that knight e2 is a better move here for white because it shields this king on e1. But most of the time, if you look at online chess, you see this move knight f3. Some of you may be wondering, and for good reason, why on earth do we care about this king on e1 being exposed? I mean, we literally have a king on e7. Well, now we have this key idea of playing queen e8, just taking one step to the left and attacking that queen on h5. Obviously, if queen takes e8, we're simply going to trade off queens, and if we play that position right, we're going to have an even game. And if white plays anything else, I actually have black with the advantage here. Notice if white here plays a move like queen c5 with check, we can actually move our king, and the white king is going to be the one in check there. And if we move like queen g4, we're now going to continue with d5, continuing to kick this queen around. And now if we move like queen a4, okay, we're going to play king f7, an almost fried fox defense type fashion. This pawn on f6, stopping this knight from getting a ton of activity, checking the king on e1. And here if we move like bishop e2, bishop d6, and I actually have black here with the edge. So y'all, going back to this position, if you see a move like bishop d3 immediately trying to eye queen h5, you could play this move g6, or you could also go with knight c6 and king e7, but it's definitely not for the faint of heart. And here, if white plays more normal looking chess with d4 and bishop d3, I personally, from a practical standpoint, like bishop e6, whole idea being if queen h5 with check, we just drop that bishop back to f7, attacking that queen and making it run away. And now if white just continues to develop, we're going to do the exact same thing. Knight c6, queen d7, castle queenside, get our bishop involved, get our back rooks involved in this game, and we got a fun game of chess ahead. So y'all going back to this position with f5, introducing the Duras Gambit. If you see knight c3, just take that pawn on e4, and then continue with the move knight f6. Prepare to take back with the e-pawn and continue developing your pieces. What about the move e5? White expanding in the center of the board. We've seen this quite a bit, and against this, I personally recommend this move of d6, just trying to chip away at the center. First off, I mean, if white takes on d6, in that case, okay, we're going to take towards the center, eyeing this move e5. If white wants to play quiet chess, we're simply going to take full control of the center, and if white stops this by the move d4, okay, we play knight f6, e6, bishop e7, castling kingside, and we're just playing chess. Now, if white doesn't take the pawn on d6, white has to defend the pawn on e5, and there's a few different ways that white can do this. First off, if knight f3, I recommend knight c6, just trying to gang up on that pawn again. As always, if white takes on d6, we're going to take towards the center. What about this move bishop b5? Well, in this case, we can actually take the pawn on e5, and this may seem a little bit scary. First off, because of bishop takes c6, giving us double isolated pawns, and also this move of knight takes e5, but in both cases, against knight takes pawn, we're going to play queen d5, activating our queen, in this case, attacking both the knight and the bishop. Again, against bishop takes c6, we're simply going to capture back. But there is one move for white, which almost seems to give white a simply one game, and that is queen h5 with check. I mean, if one of you guys, or really anybody, was playing with the black pieces here and I walk by the board, it just seems as if black has simply lost. But surprisingly, black has achieved near equality. Obviously, if king d8, white is simply able to play knight f7 with check, and we're simply losing. But we can play this move g6. The big question is, what do we do against knight takes g6? Well, I personally like this idea of queen e4 check, attacking the king. And notice what's going on here. We're attacking the king with check, and we're also eyeing this pawn on g2. If we capture this pawn on g2, we're going to be attacking both the rook and the knight, depending on the situation, and white really needs to play this move of king f1. Let's say white instead plays a move like bishop e2, king d1, etc. Against both of these, we're not going to take this pawn right away, right? If we take this pawn right away, white doesn't even have to take our rook, but can actually play knight f4 with check, and we're simply losing. So we don't want this queen on h5. We don't want this knight to move anywhere and have it be a check. So we're going to play knight f6. This knight could move now, but we're simply just going to win the queen. So this queen's got to run away. But the big question is, where does it go? I mean, if white plays a move like queen h4, we're simply going to continue with queen takes g2. That key idea, remember guys, we cannot take this pawn until this queen is not on h5, because we don't want to be in check. But in that situation, we're going to be attacking both the rook and the knight on g6, and black is simply winning that. Notice as well, this queen can't just run wherever it wants, like a square like f3, because it's simply going to give us the knight on g6. This queen has to stay along this h-file to maintain the pin against our rook. So what about a move like queen h3, trying to hold on to both the pawn on g2 and also keep the threat of taking the rook on h8? Well, there's a lot of different things that we can do, but the best move is f4, simply expanding and attacking that queen on h3. The queen simply cannot hang on to everything, and we have a ton of stuff going on here. We're attacking g2, we're attacking the knight with the queen as well. This queen's got to run somewhere, and we're simply about to go up a ton of material. So y'all, going back to this position against queen h5 and knight takes g6, whether this bishop takes on c6 or not, we have that key queen e4 idea, eyeing both the king and that pawn on g2. If this king goes to d1, or if the bishop goes to e2, we can play this move of knight f6, trying to get this queen off of h5, take on g2, and obviously if queen h3, trying to hang on to everything, we have f4 attacking that queen. What about this move king f1? Very solid move from white, just trying to hang on to material. Well, in this case, I recommend, again, knight f6. I mean, there's really no positions where we want this queen on h5, so why not just develop our pieces and kick this queen out? If a move like queen h3, again, we're going to have f4 attacking that queen, and black is simply winning that. So there's only one move, again, that gives white a playable game, and that is queen h4. And against this, we're now going to play queen takes c2. Guys, this is stronger than it looks. First off, white could take our rook, and yeah, we could take this bishop on c1 and then capture this rook. And if you did that, you'd still have about a -6 advantage for black. But really the big threat here is not taking the bishop, but playing queen d1 with checkmate. Very nice idea, taking away the square of e2 and simply giving ourselves a game over. The best move here for white, again, and really the only move that gives them not a completely lost position, is knight c3, defending that square and also defending the bishop on c1. But against this, we can now take the knight, and against this move of queen takes h8, continue with f4. What on earth are we doing? Well, we're expanding on the king side of the board, and we're obviously down quite a bit of material here, but black does have some great activity and some great attacking chances. I mean, this queen on c2 is an absolute monster, and really by playing this move f4, we are expanding, but we're also giving ourselves a square of f5 for both the bishop and the queen. I mean, I personally would love to play a move like bishop f5, castle queenside, and try to checkmate this king as fast as I possibly can. So y'all, obviously that line of knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5 is extremely sharp. But if you guys take the time to watch this video through a couple times and really try to memorize those lines and variations and understand what's going on, you're going to find yourselves winning quite a few games if you find yourself in that position, because it's really hard for white to play back-to-back moves all perfectly in a row. What about this move d4? We've covered the move of knight f3. What happens if white expands in the center with their pawn? Well, in this case, we can just take on e5 and then capture off the queen. Now this king on d1 can't castle, and our king on e8 can. And here we can play a move like knight c6. And again, something like f4. I actually wanted to share this idea, which you can use in various opening positions, and that is this move g5. What on earth are we doing? Well, notice how this pawn on e5 has one sole defender, that being the pawn on f4. So why not try to distract this pawn on f4? For example, if white takes the pawn on g5, we can play knight takes e5. We gave up one of our side pawns, our g pawn, for that central pawn on e5. We now have a passed pawn on e7, and obviously it hasn't moved, and it's not close to promoting. But this gives us a big edge going into a potential endgame where we don't have queens. In fact, right now, our next move could include knight g4, eyeing the f2 square, and then on top of that, just expanding with e5, taking full control of the center of the board. White's pawn structure is also a little bit loose, and this g5 pawn is a big weakness. So here, guys, black does have a flexible and playable game. Going back to this position, what happens if white doesn't take the pawn, but instead plays a move like bishop b5? Well, in this case, we're just going to play bishop d7, and again, if white ever takes this pawn, we're simply going to capture that pawn off on e5. And if white plays something like knight f3, we can always chip away, take this pawn on f4, and all of a sudden white has an isolated pawn on e5, which could be a weakness later on in this game for sure. And if white captures on c6 with the whole idea of taking on g5, we're simply going to win the pawn on g2, and not just the pawn, but the rook as well. So here white needs to play this move knight f3, but against this, let's expand on the king side, g4 followed by e6. I mean, we have full control of these light squares, especially with this active bishop on c6. Our bishop on f8 is also going to get into the action. We have castling queenside with check, one move away, and this knight on g8 can get to d5 in just 2 moves. I'm taking black here every time. So y'all, against the move d4, we can simply just capture off that pawn on e5, take the queen with check, make it so that this king cannot castle for the rest of the game, continue to develop our pieces, and I would say that black has the edge there. So that's usually why white instead goes with this move f4. This is the most popular move following e5, but how we approach it is still very simple. We're again going to take that pawn on e5, and now we could play a move like e6. This is what most players go with, but I personally like this move of c5. Very aggressive and dynamic, putting some pressure on that centralized square of d4 so that a move like d4 cannot be made easy. If a move like knight f3, okay, we can then play this move e6. And by the way, this move e6 could give us a potential weakness with this backwards pawn, but notice we do have it defended at the moment, and white currently doesn't have any attacking pieces, but we do got to be aware that white could try to go after this for the remainder of the game. If white continues here with the move like c3, trying to prepare the move d4, okay, let's just continue to develop our pieces. And if we do see the move d4, capture off that pawn, play bishop b4 with check, bring our knight to e7, castling kingside is 1 move away, and black here with a playable game. Thanks for watching today's video. If you'd like to learn the theory behind the accepted variation from the black perspective, click that video to the left. If you'd like to learn how to play the fried fox variation, in which we don't play f5, but instead we play f6 and king f7, click that video to the right. Leave a comment down below to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.